Hello, I'm Gautam Paul from New Zealand Blockchain Forums, and welcome to episode 6 of Blockchain Bytes. Today, we are going to be speaking with Stefan Korn, the Chief Product Officer at Callaghan Innovation. He's launched and developed numerous successful business ventures, many of which are operating in Australia, the US, and Europe. He was the CEO of Creative HQ, and he has a Ph.D. in neural networks. But enough about me telling you about Stefan. Let Stefan introduce himself. So over to you. Tell us more, Stefan.
Thank you, Gautam, and kia ora koutou. First of all, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here. So, as you mentioned, you've actually summarized my background pretty well. I've done. I sort of come out of the corporate world where I worked for large organizations like Oracle and Hewlett-Packard, and sort of came out of the computer science and IT space, and then moved more into angel investment, really. And before I was at Creative HQ, I had my own incubator, and ran a few investments through that. But at heart, I'm an angel investor. I love the idea of startups, impact organizations, and anyone trying to create something out of nothing, and the little sort of part I was able to play in some of the ventures that have come through over the years. Mm-hmm. And I've done that now for 15 years, and interestingly, a couple of years ago, I made a decision to sort of shift my investment interest much more over to the crypto space. And so obviously we'll be talking about that today. And I see a lot of parallels between startups and the crypto space, and maybe we'll explore some of them in our chat today. But yeah, so I'm approaching the entire space from an investment background.
You certainly mastered the art of sort of covering and leadership across different types of industries. So share some tips. What do you think, particularly in these extremely testing times, what is good leadership?
So it's probably one of the most interesting questions, but also one of the toughest questions to answer, because what do you say? There's so many aspects you could highlight. One of the things that I feel like we have sometimes forgotten a little bit over many decades, especially in large organizations and a little bit maybe in government, is the idea that to lead, sometimes you have to also do things that are ahead of its time, that are potentially unpopular, and you still have to do them. And if we look at where we're at in New Zealand, and following in the vision of our namesake, Sir Paul Callaghan, around getting off the grass, or all of these things that he said about how we can use innovation to change to just sort of ensure that the fabulous lifestyle that we enjoy in New Zealand, that we can actually protect that and potentially make it a little bit more sustainable and also widespread around all parts of society. And so that for me is leadership, to then challenge some of the way we have done things in the past, where we sort of said, well, the things that have created wealth for New Zealand last century are not going to be the same things that are going to create wealth for us this century. And so that's tough when you're having conversations with people who have been part of the wealth creation story in the last century. And that's where that leadership piece comes in, where how can we have those conversations in a respectful and in a beneficial way, without polarizing and without alienating parts of society. And I think that's where, for me, the finesse of leadership comes down to, is like, how do we sometimes have those difficult conversations, but still have the conversation and not shy away from it, and just trying to be nice to everyone. How do we have those tough conversations, but still get our point across, and also still not lose sight of where we want to go, actually. and follow the vision that people like Sir Paul and many others have laid down for New Zealand, and to kind of follow in their footsteps and go, right, how do we do this now, especially in a sort of post-pandemic world, or in a world where pandemics can happen all the time. And it's interesting, I'm talking to you from Germany at the moment. And it's been fascinating over the last few weeks that I've been outside of New Zealand to see, how the world reacts to all of these challenges and how we in New Zealand are positioned. And a lot of it comes down to the question you asked, that different countries have taken different leadership initiatives to deal with this pandemic differently. So, yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know if I had a good answer for you, but, I think having those difficult conversations and doing them in a respectful way for me is a big part of leadership.
Mm-hmm. And do you also think that the balance historically, and I hate to say this, but in the last century, leadership was all about the leader, whereas now in the 21st century, particularly with what's happened in the last sort of 2.5 years, 3 years, leadership is not about the leader. It is about the company. It is about all their colleagues. About I hate using the word employees, because it shouldn't be that. And everyone talks about engagement, one vision, but usually that's purely about delivering one result, which is a bonus for the EMT. So there is a huge shift change happening there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's funny, and I think the dynamic in organization is really interesting when you look at some organizations choose ELT, so executive leadership team. Others use CMT, central management team, whatever it is. All of the and so the difference between management and leadership. And I think you're right. I mean, especially in this century, where because of social media and opinion polling and fake news, also this concept of a person that everyone looks up to and they're like, wow, what a leader. Maybe we've left that behind us a little bit, and maybe that's actually a good thing. I do believe in the idea of the leadership of concepts and ideas when things get replaced by something that is clearly better. Yeah. And then it's a matter of, well, how do we achieve this as a community of people, whether it's part of an organization, part of society, or in a team. How do we get together with a few people to realize this? And then often it's less about the hero leader that kind of does it all, and it's more about people coming together and everyone contributing. I think that's also a more modern form of leadership. Absolutely. And also the other one that I really, really like is the concept of servant leadership. To actually, and some of us are exposed in positions where we have a lot of positional power by the sheer fact of the jobs that we've got. And I think the trick there is also how can you execute these roles with humility and with dignity, and still provide leadership, but not by being the guy that everyone looks to and calls all the shots and makes all the decisions, but by empowering everyone else in the group so that you can actually take a step back and the outcome that we all want happens because everyone contributes and makes it happen.
Okay. Thank you. At Callaghan, how would you best describe who and what Callaghan Innovation is and your role there?
I love that question, Gautam, because over the years, many of us, but before I joined Callaghan, and myself included, we all asked that question: what does Callaghan actually do, right? Let's be honest. But look, Callaghan is we're New Zealand's innovation agency. And when it comes down to it, we basically do three things. We provide private sector organizations with R&D funding in form of grants or the R&D tax incentive. We provide upskilling, so a lot of education around innovation techniques, IP management, capital management, things like that. So essentially like a little course offering we've got there. And then thirdly, we provide companies with access to deep tech science, to largely to do problem solving through R&D. So areas where you've got a real technical stretch and something you want to achieve, and often it's not feasible for companies to have a lot of scientists on board themselves, and so we provide that expertise through our services. So very simple: grants, skills, and deep tech expertise. That's what Callaghan does. When it comes to my role now, we've taken the step into a productized world, where we think of a lot of the things we provide into the market as a product. And that's quite unique for a government agency, and we're sort of in the middle of making that shift towards that. And so my role is essentially around how can we think of the things that we're offering into the market in a distinct way, in the same way that you might think of something that sits on a supermarket shelf. And when you walk into a supermarket, it's always very clear which section you're in and then what's on the shelf. And you look on the can of tomato soup, and you know exactly what's inside, right? And you also know what makes a good tomato soup. You want to know about the ingredients, all of that. And so we want to think of what we provide into the market in the same way, so that the consumption of what we provide becomes really easy. And anyone who deals with Callaghan can always say, that was a really good experience, or that was not such a great experience. And we know that because of all of these metrics that we're tracking. And we want to make the consumption itself so easy that literally it's like picking something off the shelf, and you know exactly what you're going to get. And it's going to be, convenient, fast and reliable. And repeatable. That's where we want to end up with all of the services that I mentioned. And so my job is to make that happen, basically.
So we're sort of repeating ourselves. That's what happened with Web 1 and then Web 2, and now we're moving to Web 3 in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, so looking at the digital economy, is New Zealand Aotearoa really ready to embrace the revolution of digital assets, decentralization, and blockchain-based trading? Because that's really where the world is going to be going.
Yeah, that is, and the short answer from my perspective is no, we're not. We've got quite a bit to go, and I'm currently in the process of writing a positioning paper that we're going to put out later this year, to kind of basically take stock of, well, where's the world at with digital ledger, distributed ledger, blockchain, digital assets, all that stuff. Where are we at? What's everyone else doing? And then where's New Zealand at? And, I'm writing this paper. I've been writing this paper over the last few weeks. And, currently I'm thinking, wow, we've got a lot of catching up to do. There's a lot of, to be honest, my personal opinion is there's a lot of skepticism in New Zealand around digital assets, in particular cryptocurrencies, which are, you hear the most about all of this technology in form of, headlines about crypto exchanges being hacked, or people getting ripped off, or some other, hack or whatever. And we are leaving a lot of the mental headspace around what this technology actually means in terms of addressing some of the challenges that we've seen with Web 1 and Web 2, as you mentioned, and the technologies that have driven that. We're sort of forgetting about that a little bit. We just latch on to the kind of the headline stuff. And, to be honest, there just aren't many people in New Zealand who even know a lot about these technologies. We look through our grant applications. I sit on most of the grants committees at Callaghan Innovation. There are very, very, very few DLT blockchain related grants applications. I'd have to scratch or think hard whether there's even been a handful in 2021. So the key indicators that we look at around talent, R&D activity, investment activity, and all of that is just not there in New Zealand. And so you compare that to other countries, and the story is very different. It's a very actively researched and pursued space overseas. And so we have that's going to be one of the challenges. Like, we're not going to be able to drive this technology forward if we don't have the interest of the people to go after it.
And what are the emerging trends?
Sorry?
What are the emerging trends you think that are really good?
So, I mean, there's a lot of, if you look at the application areas for, blockchain, there's now some very established use cases and application areas, of course. If you take the primary sector, a lot about, traceability, trackability, authenticity of products. If you look at identity management, there's a whole bunch of things where you need to be sure about the person you're interacting with online. Obviously, the financial sector is, huge in terms of use cases, taking out some of the systemic cost that sits in a lot of financial systems as a result of the legacy things we're still dealing with. There's a lot of structural inefficiencies around cross-border payments, for example. And then I think one of the most interesting areas for me is what we're seeing in the digital space, obviously, with the convergence of the gaming world with the NFT world and the crypto world. Yeah. And so we've obviously seen companies like Facebook rebrand into Meta. Everyone's getting into the metaverse. And that, for me, is going to be, I don't think people can conceptualize at this moment just how huge that is going to be. Yeah. And I think we will absolutely see a time, not too many years away, where the total value of virtual assets will exceed the total value of physical assets in the world. And I think that's the world we're heading into. And we're seeing very clearly the convergence there of massive gaming platforms that have got hundreds of millions of users every month, embracing, all of the in-game purchases are going to be done through some form of cryptocurrency, I think. And the assets that exist in all of these games are going to be represented by some form of NFT, so that they become, unique, and the ownership is unique. And in particular, what's really interesting is that ownership transcends the actual game. So that once you've got, some sort of NFT asset inside Roblox or Minecraft or whatever, so you've got that, you can take that into another gaming world and then still own that. And that's a huge difference from where we've been with assets in the past. So for me, that's one of the most interesting spaces. And again, if we look around in New Zealand, the gaming industry in New Zealand has had a tough time always, really, because they've sort of fallen between the cracks. And even from a government perspective, we've always gone like, well, they're not quite screen and film, which is obviously got a good support, but they're also not software companies, just pure software companies. So they kind of fall between the cracks a lot. And so again, this is like the worst case scenario for New Zealand and how we think about this, that now we are seeing the convergence of these technologies, and it's sort of coming together in a gaming-like situation, which we just don't know how to handle. And that's where I see the biggest challenge for all of us. How do we really create an environment where development in that space can thrive, and where we, from a government perspective, we can set support packages, or we can set frameworks for that development to happen, and how the private sector can jump in and basically say, right, we'll take it from here and we'll start competing internationally with everyone else. And one thing I'd say, Gautam, is, in New Zealand, we've talked about this sort of the weightless economy for a long time, right? For me, anything related to blockchain is the most realistic market to access from New Zealand, because even with software, ultimately you still have country sort of distribution problem, because you have to be in market. Even software, you still have to sell person to person, and then it matters, what the mood is in the market and that you're trying to access. with a lot of what I'm seeing in the NFT, crypto, digital asset space, it's essentially global communities that you cannot peg to a particular market. You can't say, oh, well, all the Bitcoin users hang out in the States or in China or in Russia, right? These are global communities, and often, if you look at where the main exchanges are located geographically, they're all over the world. They're not in a particular spot, in a hotspot, and that means for New Zealand companies, truly, it's a level playing field from a market access perspective, that we don't have to be in the US to understand the US market to be able to sell software into the US market. We can understand online communities in the same way that everyone else understands online communities, by hanging out in those communities. And our physical location is completely irrelevant. For that, and this is quite different to what we've seen previously in the waitlist economy, which is why I think this whole move into the metaverse, into online communities, is such a huge opportunity for New Zealand.
But with regards to that, what do you think our strengths are? And are we going to be are we playing to them right now? I know you mentioned that there's a lot of concern that we're not really.
I mean, as New Zealanders, we're always really good at coming up with comparatively straightforward solutions to often complex problems. And there's so many examples of that. I think in this case, that there could be so many application areas or use cases that we just sort of think of as we're embracing that space. I always back the innovative ability that comes out of New Zealand. I also think New Zealand communities are really strong. We have, we have learned, I think, better than some other countries that I've been exposed to kind of come together as communities for a common purpose. And whatever that purpose is, right? Whether it's climate change or protecting the Pacific or having a more equitable society, it doesn't matter where, again, New Zealand's got some very strong history, whether it's anti-nuclear or so defining moments in New Zealand history where the communities have come together to pursue a particular goal. And again, if you look at what's happening in the digital asset space, a lot of it is community based. And so I think we understand the dynamics of these communities really well. And again, as such, it puts us in a really good position to then leverage that for things coming together. And then, lastly, I think we're also going to see, if we take COVID restrictions out for a second, but I think we're going to see a much more transient workforce.
Yeah.
And again, I know there's a massively growing community of digital nomads who are traveling the world and working wherever, right? And it just so happens that we've just got an incredibly beautiful country where a lot of digital nomads actually want to hang out. And so again, if we get a few settings right by opening up, or not even opening up, but enabling some kind of immigration setting that allows people to hang out in New Zealand and do their work for a while, I think, again, we'll be able to leverage the natural assets that we've got and combine them with the digital assets that we're creating. And wouldn't that be an awesome kind of way to get the best of both worlds?
There's so many different areas that we can really focus on to capitalize on this new world that we live in. What more do you think could be done to encourage sort of homegrown innovation and the uptake of new Web3 technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does come back to talent and interest. Everything starts with talent, right? So again, coming back to, well, how do we foster talent, or how do we attract talent? And some of it is to do with providing useful opportunities to get young people involved, to get again that exchange happening. Of talent being able to move relatively freely, specific talent for this, And again, getting involved. As I think there is an opportunity from an investment perspective, and doing things like in the past we've done, the C Prize, where we picked an area, and it was modeled on the X Prize in the US, and we picked an area, and we just kind of put out a challenge to the country to say, hey, what can you do in wearables, or what can you do in drone technology or whatever, and the community in New Zealand by and large has responded really awesomely. And most recently we did one in clean tech, right? So again, this is something that we might be thinking about at Callaghan to stimulate through a number of challenges, because every time we've done that, it's actually created first of all, quite a lot of interest, and then quite a bit of startup activity, but also it's kind of lifted up the sector a little bit, and it's got attention. It's got attention from the investment community and all of that. So that's something that we'd be looking at, and again looking more at actually what are the key problems that we need to solve in this world, and then combining it with this new technology. There are a number of projects on the way, for example, that are combining the dynamics of cryptocurrencies with emission trading schemes, or with taking plastic out of the ocean. I mean, there are so many things that you could, and this new technology, there are really interesting concepts like autonomous organizations, and an entirely new way of lining up behind a common purpose and then achieving that purpose. And I think that's if we get involved in some of those international projects, I think it'll first of all, it'll put New Zealand on the map in terms of the digital asset space, but also it means that we then become part of these global communities, and there is more sort of knowledge coming back to New Zealand because we are participating. Currently, it feels a lot like we're sort of saying, the whole thing is a scam, best if we just don't do anything and we just wait it out. And we're not going to get a lot of talent that way. No.
Stefan, thank you so much for your, it's been fascinating to hear your views and about your history. And I'm really looking forward to actually meeting with you in the flesh on the 28th of February at our Trust, Traceability and Digital Trade conference. So it's been a delight. And I'm looking forward to see you next month. Take care.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Gautam. Really wonderful talking to you. And I can't wait to talk some more at the conference. It'll be an absolute blast.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.